Tuesday on 1 leaps forward to 2020 in Tomorrow's World. Then at 7:30 in EastEnders, Marge begs a favour from Dot.
A commode? Here?
Yes?
No. No, I'm sorry, Marge. I'm not taking delivery of a commode.
At 8, Dad's Army.
There's a Nazi paratrooper dangling from the clock tower of the town hall.
Yes.
He's dangling.
At 8:30, A Question of Sport. Peter Beardsley, Gary Mason, Roger Black and G. Armitage join the regular team leaders. In the Paradise Club at 9:30, Danny has problems with hot money. But Frank plays a cool hand.
The bet is 26,000.
Film 89 at 10:20 includes a report on Great Balls of Fire, starring Dennis Quaid as Jerry Lee Lewis. Then at 10:50, Network discusses free speech and the media and asks whether the 80s have seen a series of political attacks on broadcasters' freedom. That's Tuesday evening's lineup on BBC1.
In Look East tonight at 6:30, post boxes are sealed up in Milton Keynes as 2 post office workers are suspended. 2 of Britain's richest men are rumoured to be bidding for Luton Airport, and a supermum who's fostered more than 50 children gets the BEN. Look East tonight at 6:30.
Over on BBC2 in 5 minutes, the classic western Kirk Douglas, Robert Mitchum and Richard Widmark star in The Way West. This is BBC1.
The 6 o'clock news from the BBC with Peter Sissons and Anna Ford.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. Troops are to be deployed in London to cover for ambulance crews. The government says it has taken the action because of the gravity of the situation. None of the capital's ambulance stations is working tonight. The report on the Clapham disaster says British Rail allowed working practices to slip to unacceptable and dangerous standards. A signalling engineer resigns and 10 other British Rail staff are warned they could face criminal charges. And the East German government resigns as the country's crisis deepens. But first, the ambulance dispute deteriorates in the capital into a full-scale crisis. All the regular crews are off the road tonight amid bitter recriminations on both sides. And in the House of Commons, the Health Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, says that military ambulances and personnel will be brought in tomorrow. The opposition say he should use arbitration and not the army. The London crews say they are willing to answer 999 calls. The Health Secretary accuses them of sitting around for photo calls, pretending.
Mid-morning at one of London's busiest hospitals, Charing Cross, the police bring a man in. Firefighters have helped to rescue the patient who fell down a lift shaft. By then, there were no ambulance crews working in the capital. At Fulham Ambulance Station in West London, crews coming in for the morning shift had studied warnings from management. If they continued to refuse to work normally, they would have their pay cut. For the first time in weeks, management drew up a full normal list of non-urgent calls, and no ambulances went out to cover it. When the first non-emergency crew was suspended, emergency crews began a work to rule. The first emergency crew was suspended in East London soon after 9 o'clock for refusing to follow normal radio procedures after taking a maternity patient to hospital. The suspensions had a knock-on effect across London. In Fulham, crews returned to base in support.
When the accident motors, the emergency motors out on now, when they come back, they will be stood down. So we've got to support them.
By noon, no ambulances were operating in London. There was some confusion over whether the crews were suspended or not.
Is that the management saying that? We're not getting paid as from today, like it's from now?
Management have told me that you're not getting paid.
Union officials tried to explain the situation. For now, the crews are sitting in their stations. They say they're ready to answer emergency calls, but no calls are coming in for crews who refuse to use two-way radios.
We are not going to withdraw any emergency cover. There's no reason why anybody in London should have to stand by and accept an inferior ambulance service.
When they returned to base, the point was put to them that they had not responded to radio messages. Would they now work normally or not? And if and when they said no, then we said in that case we cannot run a service on that basis.
The Red Cross and St John Ambulance are helping out. And military ambulances are on standby, the final preparations done for a service which casualty experts fear will be second best.
No one else can do the ambulanceman's job. They're trained, they're skilled people, they have a caring approach to their work and the patients. It's the job that they've been trained and want to do. And for people to think that the police or the army personnel can do it is, for me, totally incorrect and illogical.
The dispute is beginning to spread outside London, where crews are also now doing only non-urgent work, to Surrey and to Poole in Dorset, where ambulance crews have now been suspended.
The Health Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, said in the Commons that the government had decided with the greatest reluctance to involve the army in the dispute. He said the gravity of the situation left him no alternative.
The announcement came as little surprise to MPs. With the Defence Secretary, Tom King, sitting beside him, Mr Clarke said the armed forces would be deployed from tomorrow afternoon. But the Labour benches, led by the North London MP Nigel Spearing, erupted when Mr Clarke repeated his earlier assertion that ambulance men weren't really offering an emergency service.
They are pretending to be prepared to operate the accident emergency service when in fact it is not. It is not. The men know perfectly well. The men know perfectly well. It's no good the honourable gentleman exploding with rage on the strength of his briefing from Newpie.
Mr Clarke said the claim that today's dispute was caused by the management was a sick joke being perpetrated by the unions. But Labour's health spokesman, Robin Cook, said Mr Clarke's language did nothing to help resolve the dispute. He called on the Secretary of State to urge the NHS management to go for arbitration.
If he is so right in offering the ambulance staff 6.5%, if the ambulance staff are so unreasonable in rejecting it, what is it that he has got to be so afraid of in going to arbitration, which would end that dispute this afternoon? Instead of calling in the army, why doesn't he call in the arbitrators and give London back a proper ambulance service?
For the Liberal Democrats, Charles Kennedy said public opinion was clearly behind the ambulance workers. But Conservative backbenchers said people could die as a result of the union's actions.
The dispute is now in its 8th week and the 6.5% pay offer remains the main sticking point. The union wants parity with the other emergency services, but management argues that the ambulance crews should settle for the same pay rise as other health service workers.
The ambulance dispute is deadlocked this evening. Employers and staff are no closer to agreement than they were 7 weeks ago at the start of the overtime ban. There are two key issues. Ambulance staff want an improvement on a 6.5% pay rise they've been offered and a new pay structure linking their wages to private sector earnings. It's the sort of deal already secured by the other emergency services, the fire brigade and police. It's meant firefighters winning an 8.6% increase this year and the police getting 9.25%. A fireman with 5 years' experience now earns more than £13,000 a year. A police constable earns £12,756 after 3 years' service. An ambulance man who accepted the current 6.5% offer would earn just over £10,700.
Britain's ambulance crews want fair treatment. That's all they've asked for. And to insist upon this 6.5% offer and then to lock London's ambulance crews out, for that is effectively what they have done, to stop them from answering accident and emergency calls is utterly appalling.
We have upped the offer in London to over 9%. We've said we'll bring forward money from next year. We've said we'll talk urgently about local pay flexibility. There's an agenda. That is what we want to talk about. We stand ready to do that.
Underlying the ambulance dispute are the wider issues of the government's determination that industrial action should not be seen as a route to securing higher wages and the government's need to reduce the level of pay bargains to help bring down inflation.
Well, joining us now from the headquarters of the London Ambulance Service is the chief union negotiator, Roger Poole. Mr. Poole, what's your reaction to the army being put on the streets tomorrow?
I'm utterly appalled that the Secretary of State could even consider putting the army on the streets of Britain when Britain's ambulance crews have always said that they would maintain accident emergency services. Indeed, here at Waterloo Ambulance Station, I'm stood here now, our members are in the restroom here waiting for 999 calls to be put through to them.